6,000 sick, starving men, 20,000 armoured knights. Guess who wins? October 25th, 1415, northern France, a cold, muddy field, and standing in it, a half-dead army of English peasants, archers and soldiers who haven't eaten in days or pooped solid in weeks. Across the field, an ocean of French nobility in shining armour. By every military standard, this shouldn't be a battle. It should be a massacre. And yet, somehow, what happens next becomes the greatest military upset of the medieval world. One side has wealth, cavalry, and the sheer numbers to turn the tide of war. The other side has dysentery. This is the story of the Battle of Agincourt, where bad terrain, brilliant strategy, and sheer desperation turned a hopeless army into legends. Oh, and it starts with a king who was very done with being disrespected. Act 1. The prince who became a problem meat. Henry V, 29 years old, freshly crowned King of England. He's got a sharp mind, a pious soul, and the kind of forehead that could deflect arrows. His dad, Henry IV, had overthrown Richard II. So naturally everyone in England was feeling super chill about the monarchy. Except no. The country was divided. Nobles were rebelling, the treasury was empty, and the crown looked like a hand-me-down everyone secretly wanted to return. So Henry did what any insecure young king might do. He reignited a 100-year-old war with France. Why? Because nothing unites a nation like invading someone else. In 1415, Henry landed in France with around 12,000 soldiers and a dream. Take a few towns, rub it in the French king's face, then sail home a hero. Spoiler, that's not what happened. His first target, the port city of Harfleur, decided not to cooperate. What was supposed to be a quick siege turned into a month-long mud fight. And while trebuchets smashed city walls, something else began smashing Henry's army from the inside. Dysentery. The medieval term for everyone is now dying from poop. Soldiers were collapsing in the trenches. The air smelled like death. The ground was soup, and the French were still not surrendering. So Henry did what any stressed king would do. He challenged the French heir, the Dauphin, to a 1-versus-1 duel. The Dauphin never replied, probably busy doing prince things like not sword-fighting diarrhea-ridden invaders. Act 2. March of the Doomed. By the time Harfleur finally surrendered, Henry had lost nearly half his army to illness. His advisors begged him to go home. He said no. Instead, he marched his 6,000 ragged troops across enemy territory, straight through northern France, aiming for the English-controlled port of Calais. It was less a military strategy, more of a let's flex death march. They were cold, starving and soaked. French scouts followed their every move, and somewhere ahead was the River Somme. When Henry's army reached it, they found all the bridges burned. The French had destroyed every crossing, blocked every ford, left Henry trapped. The English had to wander south, hoping to find a passable point. They were now exhausted, out of food, and still leaking from both ends. By the time they crossed the Somme, miles off course, the French army had closed in behind them, 20,000 strong. Knights, men-at-arms, archers, nobles, all clean, all fed, all pissed. Henry's 6,000 men were cornered, trapped in enemy territory, no escape. What did they do? They took off their pants, literally. English archers suffering from dysentery had stopped wearing trousers because they couldn't control their bowels. Imagine looking out across the battlefield and seeing 2,000 half-naked archers grinning at you with the longbows and the runs. It was intimidating in its own way. Henry knew they were outnumbered 3-1. He also knew the French were confident. Too confident. So he gathered his men, and instead of pretending everything was fine, he gave them the blunt truth. I would not, even if I could, have a single man more than I do. Do you not believe that the Almighty with these his humble few is able to overcome the arrogance of the French? His soldiers confessed their sins, said their final prayers, and waited for death. Act 3. Mud, arrows, and murder stakes. The night before the battle it rained. Hard. The field turned to mud. Cold, sticky, boot-sucking medieval mud. While the French feasted, drank wine and laughed by their campfires, Henry ordered his men to stay silent. Anyone who made a sound had their ear cut off, which really cut down on small talk. By dawn the French were rested and fed. The The English were cold, wet, and had spent the night in trees, but Henry had something the French didn't: a plan. He chose a narrow strip of land bordered by forest, perfect for bottlenecking a huge army. Then he had his archers hammer sharpened stakes into the ground, angled outward, to stop cavalry charges. These weren't just defences, they were impaling traps. He also sent 200 archers to hide in the woods. Then he waited, and waited, and waited. The French weren't in a rush. They figured, why attack? Let the English starve. Besides, more nobles were still arriving. Everyone wanted in on the glory of killing a king. Problem was, every new noble demanded to be in the front row, so by mid-morning the French front line was packed with lords, dukes, and fancy boys tripping over each other to be seen. Finally, Henry had enough. He gave the order, advance. The English pulled up their stakes, marched forward slowly through the muck, and then replanted them just 300 yards from the enemy, right in bow range. The French couldn't believe it. Who attacks while vastly outnumbered? Who marches toward cavalry? A madman. Or a king who knows something they don't. Henry's archers fired. A volley of arrows arced through the sky and crashed into the French front. Then another. Then another. Armour cracked. Horses screamed. Men toppled. The French cavalry charged. Straight into mud. Then into stakes. Then into panic. Horses flipped. Riders drowned in sludge. The nobles behind them got crushed in the stampede. Thousands of pounds of armour became quicksand coffins. French men-at-arms tried to advance through the chaos. They were tripping over bodies, slipping in blood, suffocating under fallen comrades. The few who made it to the English line were swarmed. Henry's archers dropped their bows, picked up hammers, knives, and mallets, and went to work. This wasn't chivalry. This was raw, brutal survival. Henry himself fought in the thick of it. One French knight made it within inches of his crown, only to be cut down. The king stood, sword drawn, bloodied and unbent. The French rear guard watched in horror as their elite front line was annihilated. After 3 hours of non-stop carnage, the field was a grave. Thousands of Frenchmen lay dead. Over 5,000 by some counts, including 3 dukes, 90 barons, and thousands of knights. The English had lost fewer than 500. It was the medieval equivalent of a high school JV team defeating the NFL. And then, Henry ordered a war crime. He saw a group of French soldiers attacking the English baggage wagons behind his line, the ones carrying treasure, relics, and more importantly his crown. Fearing a counterattack, Henry gave the order, kill the prisoners. His men hesitated. These were nobles, fellow Christians, but some obeyed. They cut down unarmed prisoners, knights begging for ransom. It was brutal, unnecessary, and very effective. The French morale shattered. Then came the twist. The raiders, not enemy troops, just local villagers looting stuff. Oops. The battle was over. Henry had won. Agincourt, a name no one in France would forget. And just to rub salt in the wound, Henry marched all the way to Calais, with his banner high, with his crown shining, and with his pants still somehow on. Henry returned to England a hero. By 1420, he forced the French king to name him heir. He married the princess. He was on track to rule both kingdoms. But then, in a final twist so gross it feels scripted, he died of dysentery. At 35. Poop strikes again. His infant son, Henry VI, inherited both crowns, and immediately fumbled them. Still, Henry V remains a legend. Because at Agincourt he didn't just defeat France. He redefined what courage, leadership, and desperation could do. He turned an army of sick, starving men into medieval superheroes, and reminded Europe that you should never underestimate an underdog, especially if he's covered in mud, rage, and has nothing left to lose. Which side would you rather be on? The starving longbowmen, or the doomed knights in the mud? Subscribe for more brutal, insane, and barely believable stories from history's darkest moments. And remember, never ignore a king with nothing to lose.